Pokemon Unite is experiencing an interesting trend at the moment, and that is that Pokemon stonks are down. Right now, Pokemon are releasing not great. This has been an insanely confusing year for Pokemon Unite, and I'm going to make a video talking more about the year that was 2023, one of the wildest years in Pokemon Unite's history. Hopefully the most wild. Like, I don't want to have 2023 happen again. We'll talk about why possibly that is behind us, why possibly we could be revisiting everything all over once again, and what is going on with every new release inside of Pokemon Unite. Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yee to the ha. First, let's quickly talk about what I mean here. The last few releases, multiple releases in a row for Pokemon Unite, have all been kinda sorta good enough and not that crazy great, and they haven't set the world on fire. Boy, that was a long sentence, but we really made it to the end, didn't we? I'm talking about Metagross, Mimikyu, Meowscarada, Blaziken, and soon to be Gyarados, and I'll talk about Gyarados here in a bit. I'm so excited for Magikarp to come to Pokemon Unite. I don't care if it's bad, I don't care if it's, honestly, if it's OP, I don't even care. I'm gonna play the freaking thing. This has nothing to do with the video, it's just something I needed to get off my chest because I love Magikarp so much. I cannot wait for it to be inside the game. Back to these sort of underwhelming releases. The community sentiment behind all of these releases clearly is that they are varying levels of meh. And I do think that some of these releases have been wildly underrated by the community, but in general, we are in a really wild place, considering that now we have to judge releases against some of the most ridiculous things Pokemon Unite has ever thrown at the game. Again, this year has been crazy. Our first release of the year was Comfey. We had a dry January, for some people in more ways than one. Keep up your New Year's resolutions, everybody. And then Comfey hit Pokemon Unite. It released in kind of a sort of underwhelming way and then immediately got some massive buffs. Obviously, we all wish we could go back in time and do everything we could to stop those buffs, but unfortunately, the time machines we have just aren't powerful enough yet. And then after Comfey begins the reign of terror that we've been dealing with for quite some time when Zacian released on Pokemon U-Day. I just said Pokemon U-Day, which I don't even know how that came out of my mouth, but on Pokemon Day. We also have a release coming on Pokemon Day this year, Miraidon and possibly Koraidon right after that, which of course I'm very, very worried about. But anyway, back to the story at hand. Zacian comes out. It's the most broken release of all time, right up next to a couple more that released this year. In fact, there are a lot of releases this year that are really up and down. You have Goodra that was kind of bad for a while and then became good. Then you have Lapras and Umbreon, crazy broken. Leafeon that was pretty good and then got some buffs. You have Inteleon, which was insane. It got a few buffs early on, and since then it's been crazy, crazy good. And then of course we have the Mewtwo's, which have just been a little slice of heaven. If you like hell. If you like hell, it's been heaven. And then after our Mewtwo's here, we again have had these string of kind of underwhelming releases. We have Blaziken that comes out, and I actually think Blaziken was pretty decent, but it released into the Mewtwo Y meta, which was just a horrible place for anything to release. Honestly, you could have released, release Lapras or Umbreon at that point, and you still would have been like, this thing kind of sucks, right? It's not Mewtwo Y. And then, of course, it got a nice buff, which was interesting. And it didn't break it. It's really, really good, but it didn't break it, which was kind of cool. So we had a release, first time it felt like in a while, even though maybe it wasn't exact, it's just the way our memories feel. The first time in a while that we kind of had an okay release and it got a slight buff. And then Mimikyu comes out. I loved release Mimikyu, but then it got a little bit of a buff. And people were saying, okay, this was a little underwhelming, and then it got a nice buff. Got too much of a buff with Play Rough, that was a little bit reverted. But Mimikyu is now in a really good spot. And then of course we have Meowscarada, that a lot of people were like, this is Again, I actually think is a little better than people think. I think our brains are fried with what a release should look like, but it also released to kind of reviews, got a nice little buff, and now it's doing pretty good. Metagross just got released. It's gotten released to kind of reviews, and it's going to, I guarantee it might, basically by the time this video comes out, this could already be old news, it's going to get a buff, and then it's going to be pretty good. And then Gyarados. We played Gyarados on the public test server, and Gyarados is kind of not amazing. It's okay. There's some cool stuff about it. You never know what level something is going to be released at into the game, because you just simply don't know what they're going to buff, what they're going to nerf. You know, Metagross came over slightly different from the PTS. Meowscarada was slightly different as well. Blaziken about the same, I want to say. Mimikyu, I want to say about the same, but it's also really hard to know how something's going to perform in the actual game once you remove it from the public test server, which is just an absolute nonsense world that would make Willy Wonka go, wow, that's crazy. So I think Gyarados is going to be another one of these releases that's going to get a little buff. And then I guess my question for you is, or the thought behind this whole video is this the right direction for Pokemon Unite? And if so, how do we keep the hype behind things inside of Pokemon Unite without things being crazy overpowered? And I think that's one of the biggest questions that we need to figure out how we're going to answer inside of the game. How do you have crazy levels of excitement while at the same time releasing things that are balanced? Because I can tell you, when you release things that are balanced, everyone thinks they suck. Everyone hates these Pokemon. I'm not gonna buy Metagross. I'm not gonna buy Meowscarada. This doesn't look that good, because we have been accustomed to things releasing crazy broken. It's an interesting position that Pokemon Unite has put themselves in, and I wonder if we have a string of releases long enough, if we can get to the point where our brain levels, our dopamine has been reset, the EX Pokemon are banned from ranked, and we can actually start to appreciate a release that's pretty good, but maybe needs a little love. I actually think Pokemon Unite is doing a much better job with their releases, a much better job in general with many things lately. However, I do think that they could handle their releases slightly better. I do think that every single one of these releases would have been a stronger release for the game if they released them at their newly buffed stats. Now, this is a really difficult thing to figure out, and of course, compared to releasing things like Mewtwo X and Y and releasing what we have now, I greatly prefer what we have now, and I think it's incredible. But I do think Pokemon Unite has a really interesting balancing act, and they have to figure out a way to make it work. And the situation that's in front of them is they want to keep the game balanced. Clearly, that's something that's imperative right now, is having a strong balanced game. Possibly the biggest reason is they're heading into their championship series, and they want a lot of these Pokemon to be playable and not something that they have to ban. And at the same time, they have to generate hype. Whether we like it or not for the most part, Mewtwo X and Y generated so much hype and excitement for the game. People picked these Pokemon up, they bought them in droves. It was a huge success for Pokemon Unite. So Pokemon Unite is going to need to thread the needle, split the difference, do a third thing that means those two things, basically. And they're going to need to be able to figure out a way to release things that are really good, but not crazy broken. And it's a very difficult thing to do. I wonder if they're gonna be able to pull it off, and I wonder if Gyarados is going to release into the game as yet another underwhelming Pokemon. I would love to hear from you in the comments. What do you think about this situation where we have multiple releases in a row that are not good? And I want you to take into account how you felt when you saw these releases, when you saw videos about these releases, when you maybe played them in the practice area, or when you bought them, and how you felt with the fact that they are not that great. Like, they're good, but they're not that great. And I really want to hear your genuine takes on this, because I think it is a tricky situation. Again, I love the releases. I actually think some of them are better than people think, but without question, multiple releases in a row that are relatively underwhelming, especially just from a hype perspective, I don't think it's going to be amazing for the community. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If I had to choose, of course, I would pick this type of release every day. We don't want to go back to the broken releases, but how can we take the excitement we would have around a broken release and bring it to something that's just pretty dang good? Love you guys. I'll see y'all next time. Nerf something.